The morning began with a sharp stripe of gold light sweeping across the porch roofs of Las Nuevas. Sunlight cut long lines over the dusty road where a few wagons rolled slow, as if the heat had worn them down. At the corner, the wooden sign of Sparrow's Rest Tavern creaked in the wind, sounding like an old breath fighting the weather. Evelyn Ward was used to heat like this. 3 years behind the counter, serving, clearing, carrying, had taught her how to let the heat slide over her skin without leaving a mark. At 27, lean but steady, she wiped down the table near the window where sunlight slipped through dust and made the room look veiled in a thin haze. The morning moved as it always did, a few men muttering over cards, the dull clink of cups, the mix of old grease and stale coffee drifting through the air. No one talked much. No one expected anything new in a town that had long settled into its own dryness. Then the door opened with a soft wooden groan. Every gaze lifted toward the man who stepped inside. His clothes were torn as if he had slept under open sky too many days. One side of his face was bruised, whether from a fall or a fight no one could tell, and his boots were worn down to where leather and dirt looked the same. He staggered one step, then another. His whole body seemed to hold on to the last thread of strength just to stay upright before these strangers. A low laugh rose from the corner table. "Look there. Another stray come begging." A snort followed. Maybe his wife tossed him out. Evelyn looked up, her dark eyes resting on the man's uneven stance. Something in the drag of his steps felt familiar, not because she had met him, but because she had seen too many lives fall apart in the same way. He set a trembling hand on the counter. "Anything to eat. I can pay later. Rigo, the broad-shouldered tavern keeper, eyed him the way a man inspects a broken item. "No money, no food. Sparrow's Rest isn't a charity. Just a piece of bread." His voice was barely sound. "I've been walking for days. Fell off my horse. Lost my way." The men burst out laughing, their voices cutting through the hot air like blades. "Fell off a horse? More like fell drunk into a ditch." Rigo folded his arms. "No money, no meal. Simple rule. You can't grasp that?" The man lowered his head. He tried to step away, but his legs gave a warning tremble. He reached for the table edge to steady himself, just as his body began to tilt. Evelyn moved before she thought. She caught his arm before he hit the floor. His hand brushed hers, rough, burning with fever, yet carrying a frailty that struck something sharp in her chest. He lifted his head. Pale blue eyes met hers, tired, bloodshot, but still holding a strange light in the sun spilling through the door. The moment was brief, only one breath long, but it froze both of them in place. Rigo cleared his throat, breaking it, apart. "Evelyn, let him go. You don't owe his kind a thing." She straightened, still letting the man rest lightly against her arm. "I'll pay for his meal." The tavern fell silent. "What?" Rigo narrowed his eyes. Evelyn reached into her apron and pulled out a few small coins, the last of her week's wages. Enough for breakfast. Whispers stirred, a few scoffs, a few pitying looks. Evelyn ignored them. "Cook for him, Rigo." The tavern keeper swore under his breath, but turned toward the kitchen. The laughter rose again, but softer now, as if no one knew exactly where to stand. Evelyn guided the man to the table by the window, where sunlight slanted in and drifted through the slow-moving dust. "Sit," she said quietly. He nodded, shoulders easing as though given permission to breathe again. Thank you. I don't know. You don't need to know, Evelyn answered. You just need to eat. She walked away before her own unease showed too clearly. When the meal arrived, he leaned over the bowl and ate slowly, carefully, as if each bite was something rare. Yet between spoonfuls, his gaze kept drifting toward the counter where Evelyn was arranging cups. It was not the look of a starving man seeking rescue. It was the stunned gratitude of someone who had just found something rare in this world. Something Evelyn herself did not yet realize she had given. Evelyn had just set the cup on the counter when Rigo's heavy hand clamped around her arm, pulling hard enough that she nearly lost her footing. Inside. His voice scraped like old wood grinding against itself. The back room was small as a burrow, thick with the smell of smoke and sweat. Rigo slammed the door, and the only light came through a narrow crack, drawing a thin line across the floor. "What in hell do you think you're doing, Evelyn?" he growled, chest rising and falling. "Helping him," she answered, her voice steadier than the tightness in her chest. "Helping who? Some filthy drifter? You know you made me look like a fool in front of everyone?" "It was just a meal, Rigo." He struck the table with his hand, scattering papers. "You're an employee. You don't talk back to me." Evelyn stayed still. The ground under her felt uncertain, yet she kept her head high. "He was hungry. I did what was right." "Not your place," Rigo roared. "You trying to play saint? In this town, everyone fends for themselves. You interfere with how I handle customers again." He leaned close, his breath hot and sour. "And I'll throw you out. No pay, no explanation. Understand?" Evelyn clenched her jaw, then nodded. "Understood." Rigo exhaled sharply and waved her off like a child who had misbehaved. "Get out." She turned away, not letting him see her shaking hand. Back in the tavern, Evelyn stopped short. The man from earlier, Caleb, stood near the door, one hand braced against the wooden wall as if to steady himself. He seemed done eating, though still worn. When he saw her, he lifted his gaze. Their eyes met again, softly, but enough to slow the air between them. "Are you leaving?" Evelyn asked, voice low like wind slipping under a porch roof. Caleb nodded, then reached into the torn pocket of his coat. He pulled out a small handkerchief, frayed at the edge. Hers. It must have fallen when she caught him. "I think this belongs to you." He held it out, his hand trembling with exhaustion. Evelyn stepped close. When she took the handkerchief, their fingers brushed for the second time. A brief touch, but enough for both of them to pause a heartbeat. "Thank you," she murmured. "I'm the one who should thank you," he replied, voice low and weak. Caleb turned away then, his steps slow and heavy. Before he reached the door, he looked back once more, his gaze lingering as though trying to fix her face in memory. Evelyn stayed still until his figure faded along the dusty road outside. Night settled over Las Nuevas, a pale violet shade draping the distant ridge. Evelyn sat outside her small rented room, its roof worn thin, its wooden walls full of cracks. The heat hung so heavy that even the wind seemed stalled in midair. She hugged her knees, the handkerchief resting in her palm. She couldn't shake the pale blue eyes of that man. Eyes lost, grateful, and something else she dared not name. She scolded herself. Why feel anything for a man with no home? Someone who might vanish tomorrow like a gust of dust? She knew hope had no place in a life like hers. Not in a town like this, but the heart did not listen. She sighed and leaned back against the wall, closing tired eyes. A footstep stopped at her door. "Evelyn, I need to tell you something." She opened her eyes. Miguel, one of the tavern regulars, stood there, worry softening his face. "What is it?" Miguel swallowed. "That fellow from this morning. The one you helped. Caleb." Her heart stilled. "He just collapsed out on the street," Miguel said. "I walked past, and folks were calling someone to carry him off." Evelyn shot to her feet, the handkerchief falling from her palm. In that moment, she thought of nothing. Not Rigo's warning, not her own caution, not right or wrong. Only one thought remained. She had to find him. The main street of Las Nuevas carried only the sound of wind sweeping over dust. Faint light from scattered windows fell across the gray-brown road where Evelyn ran, breath tight, Miguel's words echoing in her ears. He collapsed out there. She searched quickly, heart pounding. Then she saw him. Caleb lay slumped at the edge of the road, back against an old crate, hair matted with sand and dirt. His shirt was torn at the shoulder, and beneath the fabric was a split wound, dried blood dark against his skin. It looked like an old injury torn open again under the day's heat. "Caleb." Evelyn lowered her voice, unsure if she spoke his name aloud or only formed it in her mind. She knelt beside him. Up close, his face was pale in a way that frightened her, a gray cast of someone dragged past his limits and still trying to move forward. "Can you hear me?" she asked, shaking him lightly. Caleb stirred weakly, brow tightening as if fighting off dizziness. Evelyn bit her lip, glancing at the empty street, then back at the man before her. No one else would help him, and she could not leave him there. She slid her arm under his and tried to lift him. He was heavier than she expected, his body slumping over her shoulder like a sack of stone. She staggered but managed to hold steady. "Come on. I'll get you somewhere safe," she murmured. Her mother's old boarding house was only 2 blocks away. In the night's quiet, it felt like the only place she could go. The house had been empty for years. Just a wooden bed, a small table, and the cool, aged smell of abandoned boards. Evelyn eased Caleb onto the lone bed, her breath unsteady. His shirt clung to his skin with sweat and blood. She inhaled slowly and peeled the torn cloth from his shoulder. The wound was long, filled with grit and sand. Desert dust had likely infected it. She opened her mother's old chest, found her pouch of herbs and a flask of clean water. Sitting beside him, she spoke softly, half to him, half to calm herself. "Don't worry. I know how to treat this. My mother taught me." Caleb didn't answer, drifting between waking and faintness. Evelyn dampened a clean cloth and wiped around the wound. Each time her hand brushed his skin, he tensed, breath catching in his chest. But she worked patiently, clearing the dirt bit by bit, then wrapped the injury with coarse fabric. In the dim gold of the oil lamp, his features relaxed, no longer strained as they had been at the tavern. Evelyn looked down and, for a fleeting moment, saw a different man. Not the beggar others mocked, but someone worn thin by too many days pushed against the world. As the night deepened, Caleb began to fever. Sweat gathered on his brow. Evelyn used another cloth, wiping him again and again, changing water, lifting his head so he could drink a few small sips. "Don't give up," she whispered, voice soft as breath. "You made it this far." At last, his body eased, his breathing steadied. Evelyn sat by the bed, leaning back against the wooden frame, her hand still resting lightly on his arm, as if to make sure he remained there, alive. Exhausted, she drifted into sleep without knowing. Caleb woke in the middle of the night, staring at an old wooden ceiling, the oil lamp dim, and the warmth of a hand resting on his arm. He turned his head. Evelyn had fallen asleep at the edge of the bed, her hair spilling across his arm, her cheek brushing the back of his hand. For a moment, he wondered if he was dreaming. He spoke softly, voice so hoarse it barely formed sound. "Your name. What is it?" Evelyn jerked awake, sitting upright. "You're conscious. Don't talk too much. Your shoulder. You saved me," he said, slow and unsteady. "Twice now." She looked away from him. "I did what anyone should." "What's your name?" he asked again, clearer this time. Evelyn glanced at her hands before answering. "Evelyn. Evelyn Ward." Caleb pressed his lips together, as if fixing the name somewhere deep inside himself. "And you live alone?" She shook her head, though her gaze drifted aside. "I don't want to say too much about myself. You need rest. Your wound isn't healed." Caleb stayed silent, but his pale eyes remained on her a long while. There was no demand, only the quiet softening of a man realizing something mattered more than his own survival, the hand that had pulled him back from the edge. Evelyn stood, adjusting the blanket over him. "Sleep. I'll stay." Caleb closed his eyes, a faint smile touching the corner of his mouth. And as she turned away, Evelyn felt her heart slip a beat, for the first time in years. Morning in Las Nuevas slipped through the old window, leaving a thin wash of light across the wooden floor like a gentle whisper. Evelyn sat in the chair beside the bed, still holding the warm cloth she had used to wipe Caleb's brow. He slept deeper than the night before, breath less strained, his face eased of tension. She looked at him briefly and exhaled slowly. A strange relief settled in her chest, followed by an unnamed worry. She did not want her feelings to wander too far. But the fragility of the man before her, his weakened state, made it hard to look away. Caleb recovered slowly, like someone trying to return from a long spell of delirium. Each morning, Evelyn brought warm water, changed the bandage, brewed herbal medicine. At first, he said little. He only watched her with a gaze slightly distant, slightly lost, as if he still could not believe he was lying safe in a quiet room. Then, little by little, he spoke. "How long have you lived here?" "Not long," Evelyn answered. "I traveled with my mother for years. She did whatever work she could so we could get by. After she passed, I came to Las Nuevas because I thought it would be easier to find a job." Caleb listened, his eyes steady on her face. A calm attention, not insistent, yet clear enough that every word she spoke seemed to settle somewhere inside him. "You've been to many places." "Too many." Evelyn smiled, a small smile. "I'm tired. I want to stay in one place." Caleb gave a faint nod, but when it came time to speak about himself, he withdrew. "I used to work different jobs, nothing worth mentioning." "Why were you traveling alone in the desert?" He paused, choosing words that revealed as little as they could. "I had to head north, but things went wrong." "What happened?" "My horse slipped. I rolled down a rocky hill, that's all." Evelyn knew something wasn't right. The bruises didn't look like a fall. The way he had bandaged an old wound, skilled, practiced, was not the work of a novice. And the night before, when he woke in a fevered haze, his eyes held no panic of a man fleeing danger, but the steady awareness of someone accustomed to close calls. But she asked nothing more, not out of fear, but because she understood everyone carries a corner of darkness they need to keep. One afternoon, Caleb tried to sit up and nearly loosened the bandage. Evelyn stepped forward with a fresh strip of cloth. "Let me help," she said. He started to protest, but when she approached, her eyes were firm enough that he said nothing. She stood close enough to feel the warmth of his chest. As she wrapped the cloth around his shoulder, her hand brushed his skin, not intentional, but enough to tighten her breath. Caleb closed his eyes for a moment, not from pain, but from the sudden touch. "You're doing it right," he murmured, his voice low like a string vibrating in the small room. "This isn't my first time tending wounds. Your mother taught you?" "Yes. She said, if you're lucky enough to survive a storm, learn how to save someone else too." Caleb opened his eyes and watched her for a long moment. "If not for you, I doubt I would have made it through that first night." Evelyn lowered her gaze, steadying the pull inside her. "Lift your arm a little," she said quietly. As she adjusted the knot, his breath brushed her forehead. For a brief moment, the space between them folded. Only warmth and uneven heartbeats remained. Evelyn stepped back, restoring distance her own heart needed. Caleb didn't reach for her, but his eyes softened, as if telling her he understood why she withdrew. Evening light turned honey gold through the window, settling warm over both of them. Caleb drifted into sleep after the herbal tea. Evelyn cleaned the room, then sat again beside the bed, watching him briefly. There was something about Caleb, his silence, his guardedness, the small cracks between his words, that she could not explain yet could not turn away from. She thought, he is not the man he pretends to be, but he is also not the man the town assumes, and in that moment, she realized the truth no longer frightened her. It made her want to stay, to know more, even if it might become the greatest mistake of her life. That morning, Las Nuevas lay under a pale film of dust, wind drifting in thin strokes along the row of wooden buildings. Evelyn stepped out of the small general store after buying herbs for Caleb, but she hadn't gone far before whispers drifted through the air. "Heard the owner of Thorn Valley Ranch has been missing nearly a week." "That's right. They found his horse wandering out on the ridge. They say there were signs of a fight." Evelyn stopped. A cold line ran down her spine. Thorn Valley. She had heard the name often enough to know it wasn't small. One of the largest ranches in New Mexico, known by every town nearby. And its owner, Caleb Thorn, was a man spoken of with respect edged by caution. She returned home with a heaviness like stone. Every step carried the echo of those voices. Could it be? No. Too far-fetched. The man resting in her small room, thin, spent, avoiding her gaze, could not be one of the wealthiest men in the territory. But when she opened the door and found Caleb trying to stand, taking slow steps around the room, her chest tightened, not with suspicion, but with the truth that his presence fit those stories too well. "You're walking already?" Evelyn asked, keeping her voice as even as she could. Caleb nodded, breath still shallow. "I needed to move. A week in bed. It feels like my body doesn't belong to me anymore." Evelyn set her things down and watched him closely. Today, his pale eyes were clearer than the day before. Though still weak, something steady lived in his gaze, a sharpness he had tried to hide. "Caleb," she began, hesitant, "people say a big ranch owner has gone missing." Caleb went still, only for a moment, yet enough for Evelyn to see something flicker in his eyes. A secret almost revealed. He lowered his gaze and exhaled softly. "I wasn't going to hide it forever." Her heartbeat tightened. "I'm not a drifter," Caleb continued, voice dropping low like the fading sunlight at the doorway. "I was ambushed on my way back to Thorn Valley. They blocked the road, hit me, stole my papers, my money. I barely got away." She stood silent. Part of her was shocked, but another part found the explanation disturbingly logical. "So, you are—" "I am Caleb Thorn," he said, not proud, only worn, as if the truth had been heavy inside him too long. Evelyn stepped back a fraction, not from fear, but from the sharp distance between what she thought he was and what he truly was. The change was so sudden it made her lightheaded. "You should have told me from the start." Her voice was low but firm. "Evelyn, I cared for you, saved you twice, yet you didn't trust me enough to tell the truth." Caleb watched her, his eyes carrying a muted sadness. "I didn't want to pull you into trouble. I wasn't sure I could trust anyone, or trust myself then." She turned away, trying to quiet the sting rising in her chest. "I didn't ask you to trust me right away, but you left me confused when all you needed was to speak plainly." When she stepped forward to gather the coat he had left on the chair, she noticed something stuck to the back. A small cactus pad, its thin spines caught in the cloth. "Hold still," she said. Caleb turned. Evelyn reached up to remove the cactus piece. Her fingers brushed the fabric, almost his skin. Caleb flinched lightly, then, without thinking, his hand rose to take her wrist, holding it. Not tight, only holding, but enough to make her heart stumble. Evelyn pulled her hand back as if from fire. "Don't do that." "Sorry," he murmured, voice low. "I didn't mean to." Silence settled between them, both breathing unevenly. That night, Evelyn sat in her room unable to sleep. Everything, the rumors, his confession, that brief grasp of her wrist, circled her like wind pressing against old wooden walls. She stepped outside for air, and she saw Caleb sitting on the porch steps, an oil lamp beside him casting a soft halo across his face. His hair fell loose, shoulder wrapped in bandages, but his expression was calm, like someone who had grown used to carrying pain quietly. Caleb turned at the sound of her steps. Their eyes met in the warm amber glow. Neither spoke. Neither needed to. There was a quiet recognition, like a hidden current moving beneath their feet. For a brief moment, the night in Las Nuevas softened. As if it understood the two of them had drawn closer by a distance no promise could measure, yet both could feel. That afternoon, Las Nuevas shifted color abruptly. Along the horizon, streaks of red-brown clouds began to coil, and dust whipped upward in long waves like snakes winding through the sky. Evelyn looked out the window and recognized the early signs of a heavy sandstorm. "We need to bring things in before it hits," she said quickly. Caleb, not yet fully healed, stepped in to help her gather what had been left on the porch. The basin, the drying line, the old basket of dry goods. The wind strengthened, striking their backs like constant light slaps. Every time Evelyn bent down, Caleb noticed the way her hair was swept back, revealing the slender line of her neck. For some reason, amid the rising howl of wind, it made his heartbeat slip. "Get inside," Caleb said as dust began to sting their eyes. "Just a moment more." A hard gust crashed down, forcing Evelyn to shield her face. Caleb stepped toward her, taking her hand. "Inside. Now." Not the voice of command. The voice of someone afraid to lose another person in a single instant. As soon as the door shut, the storm surged like a roaring beast outside. The small house shook lightly each time the wind struck the wooden walls. Evelyn set the oil lamp on the table, its flame dancing, casting trembling light across their faces. Caleb leaned against the wall, catching his breath. Though his wound still ached, he tried to hide his exhaustion. Evelyn brought water, placing it in his hand. "You pushed yourself too hard," she said softly. Caleb looked at her, the lamplight reflecting in her deep brown eyes. "If you had fallen out there, I couldn't have stood by." Evelyn paused, her breath faltering for a beat. The wind screamed outside. The sandstorm and darkness merged into a single thick wall, while the small room glowed with the fragile light of the lamp. In that isolation, the space between them dissolved. Caleb sat on the edge of the bed, and Evelyn sat beside him to check the shoulder bandage. She touched the edge of the wrap, checking its tightness. That gentle hand made Caleb close his eyes briefly, as if the calm in her touch eased a fear he always carried. "Are you afraid of storms?" Evelyn asked. "No," Caleb replied, opening his eyes. "I'm afraid of being left alone." Her hand stilled. The words struck something inside her. "You think I would leave you?" Caleb looked straight at her, his gaze honest enough to pull the air from her lungs. "No one has ever stayed for me. Not when I was weak, not when I had nothing." Evelyn lowered her eyes, trying to steady the ache rising in her chest. "I'm used to people leaving too," she said, her voice quiet as dust settling on a table. "My mother, the places I went, nothing stayed with me long." Caleb tilted his head, the pale color of his eyes gathering light from the lamp. "But you stayed with me." Evelyn turned away, but Caleb lifted his hand slowly, gently, and placed it against her cheek. The touch made her still. Not from surprise, but because the tenderness in that motion felt like a question without words. Evelyn took his hand in hers, holding it. Not to stop him, but as if to say, "I'm here too." Outside, the sandstorm struck the walls like a great drum, but inside the small room, silence grew thicker, warmer, making each breath clearer. Caleb leaned forward. Not fast, not claiming, only two people moving toward each other because there was nowhere else left to go. When their lips met, Evelyn gripped the fabric at his shoulder as if holding on to something fragile and real. The first touch was light, but when she responded, the softness deepened into a tremor running down his spine. Caleb slipped his arm around her back, drawing her closer, and Evelyn leaned into him as though she were tired of fighting her own heart. No words, no need for any. That night, beneath the flickering lamplight and the storm's long cry, they found warmth in each other. Not hurried, not bold, full, yet quiet as the breath of the land after a rare rain. Caleb held her in his arms, and Evelyn rested her head on his shoulder, listening to his heartbeat like a confession unspoken. And in that storm-struck night, they were no longer two people hiding from their own loneliness. They were two souls who had found a place to stop, even if only for one night, even if both knew tomorrow would not be easier. But tonight they belonged to each other. The next morning, Las Nuevas carried the scent of damp earth after the storm. The sky looked clearer, as if the night of wind and sand had washed everything clean. Evelyn woke first, her hair slightly mussed, her heartbeat uneven as she looked at Caleb sleeping on the other side of the bed. The moment was quiet. A rare quiet she knew would not last. Hoofbeats sounded in the distance, first like rolling stones, then louder, sharper, like a group riding hard. Evelyn frowned, pulling her shawl around her shoulders before stepping onto the porch. Down the road, dust lifted in red patches, and through it, figures on horseback emerged. 6 of them, well-dressed, reins polished, saddles stitched with patterns she had never seen in this town. They stopped in front of her old boarding house. The leader dismounted, his boots striking the wooden ground with a crisp sound. "Mr. Thorn," he called out, relief and respect mixed in his voice. Evelyn froze. One simple call, yet it tore apart the quiet morning she had just held. The back door opened. Caleb stepped out, his hair unkempt, shirt half-buttoned, his expression startled, but within a breath, his posture shifted. Firmer, commanding, a version of Caleb she had never seen stand before her. "Sir, we finally found you. You've been missing nearly 9 days. We feared the worst." Caleb raised a hand for silence. They obeyed immediately. They bowed their heads to him, a sight that made Evelyn step back without realizing it. She felt unfamiliar, as if the woman on that porch no longer knew the man she had given the night to. Caleb turned toward her. A long pause. "Evelyn," he said, his voice still carrying the warmth of the night before, yet heavy with what he needed to say next. "You don't need to be afraid. They're my men." The leader bowed slightly to her. "Ma'am, Mr. Thorn is the owner of Thorn Valley Ranch. We serve on his patrol." Evelyn pressed her lips together. When truth stood plainly before her, it no longer resembled her vague suspicions. It was larger, beyond anything she could reach. A wealthy man, a powerful landowner, a world that had no place for someone like her. Caleb stepped closer. "Evelyn, let me explain." She moved back the exact distance he advanced. "No need. I understand now." Caleb frowned, taking another step. "No, you don't. I want—" "What do you want?" Evelyn cut in, her voice tight but steady. "To take me into your world? To bring me to a ranch where people bow to you while I'm only a tavern girl? Caleb, you know we come from 2 different places." Caleb's hands clenched, shoulders tightening with unspoken words. "I want you safe. I want to take care of you. I want you with me, at least until things are settled." "I don't want to become your obligation," Evelyn said quietly. He stepped slowly until he stood in front of her, his pale eyes deeper than she had ever seen. Last night wasn't obligation. Not ever. Her chest tightened. She remembered every touch, every breath, but reason shouted louder. "Real life is different, Caleb. You have to return to where you belong, and that place isn't where I stand." Caleb went still. He lifted his hand, wanting to touch her cheek again, but Evelyn turned away. His men stayed silent, the air holding its breath with them. At last, Evelyn spoke, soft but certain. "You belong to another world." The words struck him like a blow. He opened his mouth to say no, to reach for her, to tell her he didn't care about any distance. But no sound came. Only his eyes found hers, hurt, urgent, unwilling to let go, and hers, shining, but resolute. For a moment, Las Nuevas seemed to hold still. Caleb lowered his head, exhaling slowly. "I won't force you," he said softly. "But I'm not giving up, Evelyn." She turned away, unable to bear his gaze a second longer. Caleb stepped back, slow and heavy. His men made way. He mounted his horse, but before leaving, his eyes searched for her one last time. Evelyn stood motionless, fingers gripping the edge of her shawl. They looked at each other. No words, no smile, no step forward. Only two people standing at opposite ends of a road, staring at what they wanted but could not reach. With a pull of the reins, Caleb Thorn rode out of Las Nuevas. Dust rose behind the hooves in thick waves. Evelyn stayed where she was, watching his figure fade into the brown of the desert. She did not know the sandstorm had passed, but the one inside her had only just begun. Caleb left Las Nuevas to the sound of hooves grinding over sand and dirt. Evelyn stood behind the half-open door, watching his figure fade beneath the harsh sunlight. The escort riding with him moved like a rushing current, pulling him out of her small world and leaving behind a hollow space so heavy she struggled to breathe. The door closed, and in the dimness of the small house, Evelyn stood still, gripping the edge of the table as if searching for something to hold on to. Last night still lingered on her skin. His breath, his arms, a kiss etched deep into a place she did not dare look at. But morning had come, and with it, the truth about him, about who he was, about the distance between them. She forced herself to pull back the part of her heart she had opened. The next morning, Evelyn returned to Sparrow's Rest as though she had never left it. Everything remained the same. The stale smell of liquor, the clinking of glasses, the familiar yet never friendly faces. The tavern keeper stood near the door, arms crossed, eyes sharp as a blade. "I hear you had an important guest last night." His voice carried contempt mixed with curiosity. Evelyn stood straight. "Just a man in trouble. I helped him the way anyone should." He scoffed. "Helped him so much the Thorn escort came knocking. You embarrassed me in front of the whole town. Someone like you tangling with people like them. It doesn't look right." The men behind him burst out laughing, their eyes running over her from head to toe. Evelyn didn't answer. Not out of fear, but weariness. She only wanted to finish her work, finish the day, and return to the quiet space of her own, the place no one could reach the growing ache inside her. But as she stacked the glasses, her hand stilled. A small tremor passed through her chest. She missed him. Not the powerful man, not the ranch owner spoken of across the territory, but the man who had touched her cheek the night before, looking at her as if she were the only person who could pull him back from loneliness. Miles away, Caleb stood before the gates of Thorn Valley, a stretch of land so wide the eye could not take it in. People rushed out to greet him. They spoke of everything, their worry when he went missing, the state of the cattle, new workers, land issues, the upcoming harvest. Caleb nodded, hearing each word, but his mind felt as empty as a field after drought. Everything looked familiar, as if stepping 1 inch further would return him to who he used to be. But the truth was, he was no longer the Caleb he had been. Not after one quiet evening in that small wooden room. Not after hearing his name spoken softly and true by Evelyn, not after seeing her step back when he was found, not out of fear of him, but fear of his world. Caleb sat on the porch, looking over the vast valley. Afternoon sunlight spread across the grass like a thin glaze of honey, and the wind lifted golden dust in drifting waves. He should have felt relief. He should have felt safe. Instead, his chest felt strangely hollow. An old steward approached. "Sir, do you need rest? Your horse is being prepared. If you wish, we can arrange travel to anywhere you choose." Caleb looked down at his hands. "Anywhere," he murmured. The steward bowed. "Yes, sir." Caleb raised his head, looking toward Las Nuevas, toward nothing but red dust, crude wooden houses, and a woman he wasn't sure he had the right to return to. But his heart was certain of one thing. "Prepare my horse," he said. The steward blinked. "At once, sir." "At once." The steward hurried off. Caleb stood in the doorway of his own ranch, but his thoughts stood in front of that small house in Las Nuevas. He didn't know what to say when he saw Evelyn again. He didn't know where to begin. He didn't know whether she would open the door or close it. But he knew he had to go. He had to see her. He had to let his heart speak what it hadn't yet said. Evening light reddened the whole of Thorn Valley as Caleb stepped down the porch, his shadow long and silent. A decision had been made. Even if Evelyn feared, even if she stepped back, even if the world between them was a deep divide, Caleb did not intend to let silence be the final word. That morning, Las Nuevas lay under a pale rose film of early sunlight. Evelyn wiped the counter, her hands steady, but her mind drifting far away, as it had for days. She tried not to look at the door whenever footsteps entered the tavern, yet her heart reacted on instinct, waiting for something she knew she should not wait for. But then the tavern door opened with its familiar creak. The air shifted, slowly, as if the whole room recognized who had entered before she even turned. Conversations faltered. A glass stopped midway in someone's hand. Evelyn looked up. Caleb stood in the doorway, not the injured, exhausted man with torn clothes she had first met, but Caleb Thorn, owner of Thorn Valley, clean white shirt, tailored black coat, polished boots, a wide-brim hat casting shadow over pale blue eyes. Silence swept across the room like a wave. The tavern keeper froze, mouth open without a sound. Guests whispered, "Mr. Thorn, that's him." Caleb didn't look at anyone. He looked only at Evelyn. Their eyes met. Not fiercely, not with anger, but with something deep enough to make her chest ache. In that look was the Sandstorm night, his breath still faint on her lips, what he hadn't said, and what she hadn't dared to hear. Evelyn set the glass down, though her hand trembled. She stood tall, masking her confusion with a calm she barely held together. Caleb crossed the room, each step pulling every gaze with it. When he stopped in front of her, close enough for their breaths to meet, Evelyn looked down to avoid losing herself in his eyes. "Evelyn," he said quietly. Her heart softened like earth after rain. "You shouldn't be here." Her voice turned rough, not from fear, but from too many unnamed emotions. "I came for you." The simple words silenced the entire room. The tavern keeper hurried over, trying to claim authority. "Mr. Thorn, if she caused you any trouble—" Caleb turned, gaze calm but cold enough to cut him off. "No one here troubles me except unnecessary noise." The tavern keeper shut his mouth at once. Caleb looked back at Evelyn. "Come with me. We need to talk." His tone wasn't a command. It was a man reaching for a truth he had never faced. Evelyn hesitated, but his eyes did not push her, only waited. Only for her. Finally, she nodded. "We'll go." They walked outside, away from all the eyes. Caleb led her behind the old stable, an open patch where soft wind moved through morning dust. Neither spoke for a long time. Caleb stood before her, hands open, not reaching, but not hiding the faint tremble. "Evelyn." His voice rasped, like something tightening inside his chest. "I've been thinking. About you. About that night. About what I didn't say." Evelyn steadied herself. "Caleb, you're not part of the world I live in." "That's what you think," Caleb said. "What I think is different." He stepped closer. "You're the only one who saw me when I had nothing but breath left, when I had no name, no land, no power." A pause. "You're the only one who chose to stay." Evelyn turned away, her eyes burning. "Caleb, I don't want to be someone you lift up." "You aren't," he answered immediately. "You're the one I want beside me, the one I want to protect, the one I want a future with." Evelyn drew a sharp breath. "What are you saying?" Caleb inhaled, reaching into his coat for a small, dark wooden box. Not a fine jeweler's box, nothing ornate, just a simple one, like the man who had walked into her life the first time. He opened it slowly. Inside was a dull silver ring, plainly carved. A ring meant not to display, but to keep. "Evelyn Ward," Caleb said, his voice quiet but firm. "Will you come with me? Not for Thorn Valley, not for the Thorn name, but for me. For the man who collapsed outside your tavern and hasn't stopped remembering you since you laid your last coins on the counter." Evelyn didn't move. The ground felt as though it shifted. Wind brushed her hair. Sunlight touched her hand. And before her stood a man strong enough to command an entire region, but who now stood like someone offering all of himself for one answer. She looked at the ring, at Caleb's eyes. The tightness in her chest rose, breaking through her breath. She couldn't speak, but her hand trembled as it reached out. Caleb took it, holding gently. And in the quiet wind of Las Nuevas, the world between them narrowed to a single unfinished question, one their hearts already knew the answer to. The road toward Thorn Valley stretched out like land freshly washed by last night's rain. Early sunlight caught the fine dust, making it glimmer like tiny grains of gold. Evelyn rode beside Caleb, her hands tight on the reins, her heartbeat moving in patterns she didn't recognize. She had not exactly agreed, but she could not pull her hand away from his when he offered it that morning. Caleb rode slowly, as if afraid of overwhelming her with the reality of his world. Whenever she glanced at him, he looked ahead, his expression steady and gentle, as though calming her fears with his silence. "We're almost there," Caleb said softly. "Don't worry." Evelyn didn't answer. She only drew a long breath. The scent of post-rain earth, warm sunlight, leather, and Caleb's coat drifted together in the air. All unfamiliar, but not frightening as she had expected. When they crested the last ridge, Thorn Valley appeared, a land so vast her eyes could not find its end. Long fences ran across green fields fresh after the rain, New barns stood bright, and at the center of it all rose a large pine wood house, broad, beautiful, not built to boast wealth, but built to live in, to breathe in, to hold a family. Evelyn lost her breath for a moment. Caleb glanced at her, catching the awe in her eyes. If everything feels too big, you can tell me. I don't want you to feel out of place. She shook her head. No, it's just, I've never seen anything like it. Caleb smiled. Then let me show you. Inside the house, the old steward bowed low. His eyes flickered with surprise at the sight of Evelyn, but there was no disdain. Perhaps he understood Caleb never brought anyone here unless it meant something. Caleb led her through the wide sitting room, where sunlight fell through the aligned window panes in long, pale beams across the polished floor. I've had the place being restored these past months, Caleb said slowly. But there's one room I kept untouched until I was sure. Evelyn tilted her head. Sure of what? Caleb didn't answer. He only led her up the stairs. The room waited at the end of the hall. When he opened it, Evelyn stopped. It was warm like an autumn afternoon. Cream-colored curtains, a large wooden bed with fresh white linens, a small stone hearth, a vase of wildflowers on the table, still fresh, as if picked that morning. The room wasn't extravagant. The room was warm. The room felt like someone had thought of her while setting each detail in place. Evelyn stepped in slowly, as though afraid she might break something. Then her eyes caught something in the corner. A wedding dress hung on a wooden stand by the window. White, light, tailored to her size so perfectly she didn't understand how it could exist. Evelyn froze. Caleb stepped behind her, stopping with enough distance not to pressure her. I didn't buy it to bind you, he said quietly. I only wanted that if one day you chose me, you wouldn't have to wait a single day to begin a new life. Evelyn touched the soft fabric. Her chest tightened. Caleb, when did you prepare this? From the day I woke in your small room, he answered. No hesitation, no hiding. From the moment I knew, I didn't want to live a single day without the chance of seeing you walk into the morning light. Evelyn turned, her heartbeat near breaking. I don't know if I fit here, she said, her voice like a long breath. I don't know either, Caleb replied. But I know I want to try. I want you to have a place to breathe, to rest, to live, even if you don't choose me in the end. The last sentence made Evelyn tighten her grip on the dress. Caleb looked at her as though even a brush of wind could undo him. Yet he stayed patient, crossing no line she was not ready for. Evelyn, he said, his voice deep and low. I didn't bring you here to keep you. I brought you here so you'd know. If the world out there is too harsh, this place will always be open. Afternoon light spilled through the window, covering them in a soft glow. Evelyn stood in the new room, on the threshold of a life she had never dared imagine. Standing before a man who spoke little, loved deeply, and waited as though time mattered less than her choice. And for the first time, she wasn't afraid. She felt her heart had stepped inside long before she had. The wedding took place on a late summer afternoon, when the sky over Thorn Valley carried a soft gold light, like a thin cloth laid gently across the distant hills. No noise, no music. Only the wind slipping through wooden fences, the faint calls of cattle across the fields, and the steady rhythm of two hearts choosing a simple life together. Evelyn stepped out of her new room wearing the white dress Caleb had kept for so long. Not the grand gown of wealthy ladies, just a soft, flowing dress sewn by the finest hands in the valley, fitting her eyes and her quiet smile. Caleb waited in the grass behind the house. He wore a white shirt and a gray coat, his hands trembling like a man in love for the first time. When Evelyn walked toward him and the wind lifted her hair, Caleb watched her for a long moment, saying nothing, as if a single word might break the moment apart. They exchanged vows before a few of Caleb's trusted people and some ranch hands. A small ceremony, warm enough that Evelyn felt as if her mother were standing somewhere in the wind, smiling. When the rituals ended, Caleb leaned his forehead to hers and whispered, low as breath, "Welcome home." In the first month after the wedding, Evelyn spent her days learning the rhythm of her new life. Thorn Valley was too wide, too quiet, too different from anything she had known. Many times she wondered if she belonged here. But each morning, seeing Caleb stacking wood, brewing tea, or standing on the porch watching the sunrise, she knew she was not lost. One day, Caleb led her to the old wooden building on the south side of the ranch, once a storage barn. "There's something I want you to see," he said, opening the large door. Inside, light fell through the high windows onto round wooden tables, long benches, and a small kitchen counter newly restored. A wooden sign hung on the wall, "The Hearth Hope Kitchen." "This is," Evelyn exhaled. "Your place, Ma," Caleb said. "If you want it. If bringing warmth to travelers, the way you fed me once, is what you'd choose for your life." Evelyn looked around. The room still held the scent of fresh lumber, but she felt its warmth already. Not because it was large, but because of the small sign on the counter. "Pay what you can. If you can't, we'll feed you anyway." Evelyn turned to him. "Do you think this is wise?" Caleb gave a faint smile. "You saved me with one meal. There's no reason you shouldn't offer hundreds more to others." The kitchen opened on a clear morning. No ceremony, no ribbon cutting. Only Evelyn behind the counter, Caleb setting out a few chairs on the porch, and the smell of fresh bread drifting down the dirt road. The first visitor was an old woman from the western cottages, then a few ranch hands, then wandering travelers passing through. They placed coins on the counter, sometimes only words of thanks. Evelyn always smiled. She had never been this happy. Near noon, the door opened again. A young man, not yet 20, stood in the doorway. His shirt torn, hands shaking, eyes red. "Sorry," he whispered. I have no money. But someone told me, here, I could." Evelyn set the towel down and walked toward him. "You can," she said gently. "Would you like the seat by the window? It has the best light." The young man looked up, gratitude filling his eyes. Evelyn led him to a table, set a plate of warm bread, a bowl of soup, and a cup of water in front of him. "Go on. No one will ask you anything." When she turned back, Caleb stood leaning in the doorway, arms folded, eyes fixed on her. Evelyn looked at him for a long moment. His gaze brought her back to that morning long ago, when a worn-out stranger sat by a window drinking a cup of coffee she paid for with her last coins, when those pale blue eyes lifted toward her with a quiet kind of gratitude. Caleb walked closer and tilted his head slightly. "What are you thinking?" Evelyn smiled, the kind of smile only he understood. "I'm thinking, maybe fate is just a single meal." Caleb touched her shoulder lightly. his eyes warm and steady. "And sometimes," he said, "a lifetime begins with one look." 10 years passed like stream water moving through the valley of Thorn Valley. Quiet, unhurried, steady enough that anyone could see the land had changed shape under the hands of two people. Evelyn had grown used to the morning wind brushing through the wooden fences, the clatter of hooves in the front yard, and the bright laughter of children echoing from the porch, a sound she had never dared to imagine would belong to her back when she was the girl from the Las Nuevas tavern. Caleb stepped onto the porch, his hand resting on the newly painted beam. He looked out over the wide fields where the cattle grazed in the first light of day, and he smiled when he heard small footsteps running behind him. "Pa, look at the horse I built." Their son, Elias, 8 years old, rushed over holding a small wooden frame he had built himself. He carried Caleb's pale blue eyes, but the way he smiled, bright and open, was all Evelyn. Caleb bent down, lifted the boy with one arm, and spun him once in the air. "You did a fine job," he said, pride steady in his voice. From the doorway, Evelyn watched them, her hand brushing the place where their second child once kicked beneath her ribs. Blossom, now 6, sat on the porch steps, absorbed in her watercolor paints. "What are you drawing?" Evelyn asked. Blossom looked up, her wide brown eyes clear as early autumn. "Our house," she said. "I'm drawing it big so when I grow up, I'll remember." Evelyn smiled and sat beside her. The scent of pine, watercolor, and morning wind settled around them, and she felt a peace deep enough to bring tears. She had once feared happiness would never be hers, but now it rested in her hands, quiet, steady, complete. At noon, the family gathered inside the Hearth Hope Kitchen, now the heart of the entire region. Travelers came because they'd heard of the warm meals served here. The poor came because they knew no one left hungry. Orphaned children found in Evelyn a tenderness equal to kin. Caleb stood leaning against the doorway, an arm around his wife. "Let's stay open a little later tonight," he murmured. "For something special?" Evelyn asked. Caleb kissed her hair. "Anniversary of the day you took me in at that old boarding house." Evelyn laughed softly, resting her head on his shoulder. "Caleb, you were a battered mess back then. Hardly looked like anyone at all." "But you saved me," he said. Evelyn pressed her lips together, touched by a memory far gentler than she expected. "I never thought that day would lead us here." Caleb tightened his arm around her. "I think your heart knew long before you did." The simple words warmed her cheeks. By late afternoon, the sky turned the color of honey. Caleb and Elias checked the northern stables, while Blossom held tight to Evelyn's dress, telling her about a small lost bird she had seen by the fence. When they returned home, Evelyn paused at the porch steps. Caleb came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist, his chin settling on her shoulder, the way he had done for years. Before them, their 2 children ran across the grass, the late sun catching their shadows. Laughter carried on the warm air. The house behind them glowed. Smoke from the Hearth Hope Kitchen drifted in a soft ribbon into the purple sky. "Our home," Caleb whispered. "Yes," Evelyn answered, touching his hand. "But also the dream I never dared to build without you." Caleb shook his head. "You built it with your own heart, Evelyn. I only stood beside you, trying to be worthy of you." She turned to him, her dark eyes tender as the still evening. "You've done far more than that." They stood quietly, watching their children circle each other in the yard. No more words were needed. For true happiness isn't loud. It's the moment a person realizes they've found the right direction, the right companion, the right life. The wind drifted lightly. Evelyn leaned into Caleb, and he held her in the familiar way he always had. And in the golden light of Thorn Valley, two souls who once wandered the desert alone now stood beneath the roof they built together, whole, steady, and peaceful enough that neither wished to leave again. Some stories don't need lightning, grand vows, or spectacle. Only two people kind enough to see each other through the dust. Evelyn and Caleb began with a simple meal, a trembling touch, a night of shelter, and grew into a home wide open to the world, where children's laughter rose like a gentle answer from fate. People say life will never run out of rough roads, but if someone stands beside you, sharing breath, sharing meals, sharing silence, every hardship softens. And in the end, we learn the rarest treasure isn't land or wealth, but the ones who stayed when the world fell apart.